More than 200 men rode into a valley. Not one rode out. In the summer of 1876, somewhere along a river in Montana Territory, the United States Army suffered the most complete military annihilation in the history of the American frontier. Every soldier in George Armstrong Custer's direct command was killed. Not most of them, not the majority. Every single one. The Army called it a massacre. The Cheyenne and Lakota called it a victory. And for over a century, only one of those descriptions appeared in the history books. 22 years after that June afternoon, a man named Two Moon sat down across from a white writer named Hamlin Garland and told the other side of the story. Two Moon was a Northern Cheyenne chief. He had been 34 years old on the day of the battle. He had fought from the moment the first soldiers appeared on the ridge until the last gun fell silent. He had seen it all. And what he described was not the heroic last stand that America had spent 2 decades building into legend. It was something far more brutal, far more human, and far more true. Here is the difference between the two versions of this story. One version has paintings. It has dime novels and newspaper illustrations, and eventually Hollywood films. It has Custer standing tall with golden hair flowing, saber raised, making his glorious sacrifice against savage hordes. That version was distributed to saloons across America by a brewing company. It hung on the walls of 10,000 bars. An entire generation of Americans grew up believing in it. The other version has 7 words. 7 words spoken by a man who was there. We had no dance that night. We were sorrowful. By the end of this video, you will understand why those 7 words contain more truth about the Battle of Little Bighorn than everything else that has ever been written about it. But first, you need to understand what Two Moon rode into that morning, and why neither side of this story ends the way anyone expected. To understand what happened along the Little Bighorn River, you need to understand what the people living there were defending. Not territory, not a strategic position on a map, a way of life that was already dying. 2 years earlier, gold had been discovered in the Black Hills of Dakota Territory. That land was sacred to the Lakota Sioux. It was protected by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, signed by the United States government, guaranteed in perpetuity. The guarantee lasted precisely as long as it took for the word gold to reach the newspapers. Thousands of miners flooded in illegally. The government, rather than enforce its own treaty, issued an ultimatum. All Lakota and Cheyenne bands must report to their agencies by January 31, 1876, or be considered hostile. Hostile, their own word for people living on their own land, under their own treaty. But understand what the people camped along the Little Bighorn already knew about their situation. The great buffalo herds that had sustained Plains life for centuries were being systematically slaughtered. Not by necessity, by design. Hunters hired to feed railroad workers were killing hundreds of thousands of animals per year. Army commanders openly encouraged it. Kill the buffalo, kill the Indian way of life. The railroad was already crossing the plains. The open grasslands that had been home to these nations for generations were shrinking with every passing season. The people camped along the greasy grass, as they called the Little Bighorn River, were not naive. They knew what was coming. The village stretched 3 miles along the river's west bank. 6,000 to 8,000 people. Women, children, elders, warriors. Every band, from the Hunkpapa to the Oglala to the Northern Cheyenne, had gathered. It was the largest concentration of Plains Indian people anyone alive had ever seen, and many of them understood that this might be the last free summer they would ever know. They were not running. They were not hiding. They had decided. George Armstrong Custer was 36 years old. He had built his entire reputation on speed and aggression. During the Civil War, the youngest brevet major general in the Union Army, on the plains, the man who had attacked a sleeping Cheyenne village at dawn on the Washita River in 1868 and called it a triumph. He believed in the formula: strike fast, hit hard, before they can run. What he did not know, what no messenger had managed to bring him across the vast distances of Montana territory, was that 8 days earlier, a column of over 1,000 soldiers under General George Crook had been fought to a standstill at the Battle of the Rosebud. Two Moon himself had fought in that engagement. The warriors had turned Crook back. He withdrew and played no further role in the campaign. One of the three converging columns meant to trap the village was already gone from the board, and Custer had no idea. He was riding forward into a void of information, making assumptions that every mile was proving wrong. His Crow scouts climbed to a high point called the Crow's Nest and looked into the valley. What they saw stopped them cold. A pony herd so vast it looked like a moving shadow across the earth. Beyond it, thousands of teepees stretching along the river until the far end disappeared into the haze. Interpreter Mitch Boyer told Custer directly, "There are more warriors in that valley than the regiment has bullets." Custer dismissed the warning. His greatest fear was not that the village was too large. His greatest fear was that it would scatter before he could strike. That fear drove every decision he made for the next several hours. He divided his regiment of roughly 600 men into 3 separate commands that could not see each other, could not communicate, could not provide mutual support. One battalion sent southwest on a scouting sweep. One battalion ordered to charge the southern end of the village. Custer himself, with 210 men swinging north to hit from the flank. Now consider what those men were carrying. Springfield Model 1873 carbines, single shot, reliable at range but slow to reload, and dangerously prone to jamming when overheated. The copper cartridge casings would expand in a hot breach and stick, requiring the trooper to pry the spent casing out with a knife before he could fire again. Against them, many warriors carried Winchester and Henry repeating rifles. A Springfield carbine fires 1 round every 8 to 10 seconds. A Winchester repeating rifle fires 15 rounds per minute. Do the math. Custer was not riding into a battle. He was riding into the last act of a people who had decided they would rather die standing than disappear sitting. And Two Moon was waiting for him. It is approximately 3 in the afternoon. Major Marcus Reno leads his battalion across the Little Bighorn at a ford and forms a skirmish line facing the southern end of the village. For a few minutes, the charge appears to be working. Soldiers advance at a gallop, carbines cracking, dust billowing behind them. The line surges forward across the open ground toward the edge of the camp. Then the warriors come. Hundreds of them. They pour out from between the lodges like water breaking through a dam, on foot and on horseback, erupting from the village in a wave that stuns the soldiers into hesitation. Leading the counterattack from the south is a Hunkpapa war chief named Gall. In the opening moments of Reno's charge, soldiers' bullets tore through the southern lodges. Gall's 2 wives and 3 of his children were killed. They died in the first minutes of the fighting, cut down before anyone had time to run. What replaced Gall's grief in that moment was not rage in the ordinary sense. It was something colder, something that had no bottom, a cold, obliterating fury that would drive him forward through the rest of that afternoon, with nothing left to lose and nowhere to put the pain except into the destruction of the men who had caused it. Gall's counterattack shattered Reno's line. The soldiers fell back, first into a stand of timber along the river, then in a chaotic, scrambling flight up the bluffs on the eastern bank. Men were cut down as they fled across open ground. Horses went down in the river, throwing riders into the current. Some soldiers were left behind in the timber and fought their way out alone. By the time Reno's survivors reached the high ground, 40 of his men were dead. They were pinned down on the bluffs, unable to move, unable to help anyone. Two Moon has just finished driving Reno's soldiers up to the bluffs when word ripples through the warrior mass like an electric current. More soldiers to the north, riding along the ridge line above the river. More blue coats. Two Moon turns north. Around him, hundreds of warriors, Cheyenne and Lakota together, are doing the same. Some on horseback, leaning forward with rifles across their saddle bows. Others moving on foot through the sage and bunch grass, using the folds of the land for cover. The terrain south of Custer's position is cut through with deep coulées, dry ravines carved by seasonal runoff. These hidden channels run from the river bottomland up through the bluffs like secret passages. Warriors who know this country, and they all know this country, flow through them unseen until they emerge behind and around the soldiers in positions the troopers cannot see until it is too late. This is not a mob. These are experienced fighters who have ridden together for years, who understand instinctively how to use every fold of ground, every dry wash, every ridgeline. They are not running toward the soldiers, they are hunting. Custer's battalion of 210 men in 5 companies is moving north along the high ground east of the river. His exact intentions at this moment remain one of the great debates in military history. What is not debated is what is happening around him. Warriors who shattered Reno's command barely an hour before are streaming northward, paralleling his route. Others are crossing the Little Bighorn at multiple points, moving up through the coulées, emerging behind and around the soldier column in positions no map could have predicted. From below, Custer's men can see the village, the enormous pony herd, the sprawling camp, the smoke from cooking fires. Some accounts suggest the soldiers cheered, believing victory was close. What they could not see, could not know, was that the coulées beneath them were already full of warriors. Now put yourself inside that soldier column. You have been in the saddle for days. Real sleep has not happened in longer than you can remember. Your horse is spent. Your carbine is hot from the firing during Reno's charge. The copper casings are already starting to stick in the breech. You have 100 rounds of ammunition. Against you, warriors with repeating rifles that do not jam and do not need 8 seconds between shots. And now, from every direction, war cries. Not from one side, from all sides. The man beside you looks left, looks right, looks at you. The coulées that seemed empty a moment ago are producing warriors who were not there before. This is what Custer had been warned about at the Crow's Nest. This is what Mitch Boyer had tried to tell him. This is the valley he chose to ride into anyway. Two Moon leads his warriors forward from the northwest. Crazy Horse sweeps in a wide arc to the north, sealing the route of retreat in that direction. Gall, still burning with his cold and bottomless fury, drives from the south and east. The warriors of the Rosebud, veterans who had turned back 1,000 soldiers 8 days earlier, press from multiple directions simultaneously. Custer's command is being compressed. 5 companies that began the afternoon as an organized cavalry battalion are fracturing into isolated clusters, each pocket of soldiers increasingly cut off from the next. The soldiers are fighting. Their carbines crack and bark across the ridgeline. But the Springfields are jamming now in the heat. Troopers pry at stuck casings with their knives. That metallic scrape of blade on jammed metal, mixing with the bite of black powder smoke and the screaming of wounded horses, is the sound of a command disintegrating. A Springfield carbine fires 1 round every 8 to 10 seconds. In that time, a warrior with a Winchester has fired 7 or 8. Think about what that means in practice. A trooper fires his carbine. He thumbs open the breech. The copper casing has expanded in the heat and will not extract. He pulls a knife from his belt and pries at the stuck brass. His hands are shaking. The man to his left goes down. He finally frees the casing, drops it, reaches for a new cartridge from his belt. His fingers fumble. He inserts the round, closes the breech, raises the carbine, fires. That sequence has taken 12 seconds. In those 12 seconds, a warrior 40 yards away has fired 3 shots. One of them has found its mark. The trooper who was loading to his right is no longer there. Two Moon dismounts from his white horse. He is on foot now, fighting at close range, close enough to see the sweat and terror on the faces of the soldiers. He describes a detail that tells you everything about the organization of the warrior response. Guns, plural. Warriors are passing spent weapons back to be reloaded, while others fire fresh ones. One man fires. Another feeds cartridges into a second rifle. When the first weapon is empty, they swap. The volume of fire is continuous, and it does not stop. Two Moon's account describes warriors breaking through the remaining soldier lines, crossing ridges, engaging men who are no longer fighting back effectively, men who are wounded, men who have fired their last cartridge, men who simply stand or kneel or sit with blank faces while the world roars around them. The gritty feel of powder residue coats every surface. Fingers, faces, the stocks of rifles grown hot enough to burn bare skin. Dust rises from the scuffed and churned ground, mixing with smoke into a haze that turns the afternoon light the color of old brass. What is remarkable about Two Moon's account is what it does not contain. There is no boasting. There is no triumph. He describes the fighting the way a man describes hard and dangerous work. Not with pleasure, not with glory, with the measured tone of someone recounting what had to be done. He does not demonize the soldiers. He does not elevate himself into a hero. He simply tells what happened. That restraint makes his words more powerful than any embellishment could. Two Moon was not telling a story of glory. He was describing the methodical killing of 200 men, and the quietness in his voice was the most unsettling part. The soldier lines are no longer lines. They are clusters of 5, of 6, of 2. Men fight alone on a ridge, surrounded on every side. Some try to run downhill toward the river. They do not get far. The warriors are everywhere, below them, above them, on all sides, pouring fire into the shrinking pockets of resistance from horseback and on foot. The gunfire reaches a crescendo, a roaring wall of sound, and then gradually begins to thin. Fewer soldiers are firing back. The intervals between shots grow longer. Something breaks in them. It is not surrender. There is no white flag. There are no raised hands. It is collapse. The organized resistance simply ceases. Men stumble forward and fall. Others stand motionless in the open, as if the capacity to act has drained out of them entirely. The will to fight does not end with a decision. It ends when the mind reaches a point beyond which it cannot function. Two Moon witnessed that point. On a ridge above the Little Bighorn River in the summer heat of June 1876, 210 men crossed it, and then the guns stopped. All of them, at once. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Two Moon had ever heard. The firing stops. The valley falls into a ringing silence. The kind of silence that comes after sustained gunfire when your ears are still humming and the world seems muffled and far away. Every soldier in Custer's battalion is dead. Not one survivor. Not one prisoner. Not one man who escaped to tell the tale. The only living things on the ridge are warriors, wounded horses, and the dead. Flies are already gathering in the June heat. Wounded horses scream and thrash, a sound that multiple participants on both sides would later describe as the most haunting memory they carried from this place. What happened next is the part that American history spent the longest time misunderstanding. The warriors moved through the fallen soldiers, taking weapons, ammunition, clothing, and equipment. This has been described in white accounts as mutilation, as savagery, as proof of the brutality of the enemy. It was none of those things. It was survival. The people in that village existed on what they could carry and what they could take from those who came to destroy them. Weapons were scarce and desperately needed. Ammunition even more so. A Winchester rifle taken from a fallen soldier could protect a family the following winter. A cartridge belt could be the difference between starvation and survival in the months ahead. The stripping of the bodies was not a celebration. It was a community providing for itself the only way it could. Two Moon noted something in the aftermath that stripped away every rank, every reputation, every military distinction in a single observation. Once the bodies were stripped, no one could tell which were officers. The great Custer, golden-haired, the son of the morning star as the Crow had called him, lay somewhere on that hill, indistinguishable from the youngest private who had followed him there. Death had made them equal. Fame, rank, reputation, all erased by the democracy of bare skin in the Montana sun. Then Two Moon and the other chiefs did something deliberate, something that no army report would record or understand for decades. They walked among the dead and began to count. Not casually, not approximately. They counted with Tallysticks, an ancient and deliberate method. Each body received a stick. The counting was methodical, careful, and complete. It was an act of recognition, a formal acknowledgement that these were human beings who had lived and breathed and now were gone. Whatever the soldiers had come to do, whatever the army that sent them represented, the men themselves had been people. Two Moon counted 388 soldier dead. Modern scholarship places the United States total at approximately 268, including all of Custer's men, plus casualties from Reno and Benteen's commands during the extended siege on the bluffs. The discrepancy reflects the fog of battle, the chaos of counting across miles of broken terrain, and the passage of more than 2 decades before the words were recorded. But the method matters more than the number. Chiefs walking among the fallen, marking each body with a stick, the deliberateness of it, the respect embedded in the act of counting. Now the date. The news of what happened along the Little Bighorn River reached the outside world on July 4, 1876, the centennial of American independence, the 100th birthday of the United States. The nation was celebrating in every city and town, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Fireworks over Philadelphia, brass bands in New York, 100 years of independence, expansion, and what the country told itself was progress. And on that same day, the newspapers announced that an entire cavalry command had been wiped out, every man under Custer's direct command, dead, by the people the army had been sent to subjugate. On the 100th birthday of the nation that was trying to erase them, the juxtaposition was not lost on anyone. In less than an hour, 210 soldiers had ceased to exist, and the country celebrating its centennial discovered in the same breath that its frontier myth was not as invincible as it believed. 4 miles to the south, on the bluffs above the river, Reno and Benteen's survivors were still fighting. They would hold out through the night and into the next day before General Terry's relieving column finally arrived on June 27th. What Terry's men found on the battlefield defied comprehension even for hardened frontier veterans. The remains of over 200 men lay across the ridgeline in states of advanced decomposition under the Montana sun. The dead were buried where they lay, in shallow scrapes of earth that the wind and rain would eventually expose. For years afterward, bones surfaced from the ground. The land would not hold what had happened there. But back in the village that evening, something unexpected was happening. The warriors who had just delivered the most complete military victory against the United States Army in the history of the frontier were not celebrating. Two Moon said it plainly. We had no dance that night. We were sorrowful. Victory dances were a deeply important part of Plains warrior culture, a celebration of courage, a communal honoring of bravery performed under the stars, while drums pounded and voices rose. The absence of a dance is not a small thing. It is a statement about what the victory had cost to witness. The warriors had defended their families against an army that attacked their village without warning, that fired into lodges where women and children slept. They had done what had to be done, and the scale of it, the totality of it, the 200 men on the ridge, left them with something that had no name in any language. Not guilt, not regret, something heavier. The weight of having looked into the eyes of men who were trying to kill you, and having killed them instead, and knowing that on the other side of the river, those men had families too. Two Moon does not say triumphant. He does not say proud. He says sorrowful. That single word is the most humanizing utterance in any account of the Battle of Little Bighorn from any side. Within days, The chiefs understood what was coming. The army would return, not with one regiment, but with thousands of soldiers. And this time, there would be no stopping them. The great village began to break apart. The bands scattered in every direction. Sitting Bull led his people north toward Canada. Crazy Horse took his warriors into the Powder River country. The largest gathering of Plains Indian people in living memory dissolved like smoke on an autumn wind. They had won the battle. The war, the long, grinding war of reservation and removal, was already lost. Within a year, the bands were run down one by one. Crazy Horse surrendered in May 1877. He was dead by September, stabbed by a soldier's bayonet at Fort Robinson, Nebraska. He was 35 years old. Sitting Bull returned from Canada in 1881 and spent the rest of his life as a prisoner, paraded before audiences in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He was shot and killed by Indian police on his own reservation in 1890. Gal, the man who had fought with cold, obliterating fury through that afternoon, who had lost his wives and his children in the first minutes of Reno's charge, who had driven his grief into the destruction of 200 soldiers, went home to empty lodges. He had won, and he had nothing. That is the cruelest arithmetic of the Battle of Little Bighorn. The victory was real. The cost of winning it was everything that followed. While the warriors scattered and were hunted down, America was building a different story. Paintings showed Custer standing tall, golden hair flowing, saber raised, dying heroically surrounded by savage hordes. The most famous image was distributed to saloons across the country by a brewing company. It hung on the walls of 10,000 bars. An entire generation grew up looking at it. The reality, a fractured command, a catastrophic tactical blunder, a battle that lasted less than an hour, was buried under layers of romantic nationalism. Custer became a martyr, the warriors who defeated him became villains, and the native voices were ignored for decades. Two Moon lived until 1917. He was old enough to see automobiles on the roads, old enough to watch airplanes cross the sky above the reservation, old enough to witness a world transform itself so completely that the life he had lived before that June afternoon in 1876 seemed to belong to a different species of human being entirely. The warrior who had fought Custer at 34 became an old man in a world that bore no resemblance to the one he had ridden through as a young man. The buffalo were gone, not diminished, gone. The herds that had once darkened the plains for as far as any eye could see had been reduced to scattered individuals on protected reserves. The open grasslands where the Cheyenne and Lakota had lived for generations had been surveyed, parceled, fenced, and farmed. The rivers had new names on new maps made by people who had never seen them before the army arrived. The open plains, as Two Moon had known them, existed only in memory and in the stories old men told to anyone who would listen. And fewer people were listening every year. Two Moon became a reservation chief. He cooperated with the government. He served again as a scout, the same dual life he had always lived, inside both worlds and fully at home in neither. He walked the line between what his people needed to survive and what the government required of him. The same calculation every reservation leader made, every day, in the decades after the wars ended. He made accommodations that younger warriors found unforgivable and that the government found insufficient. He endured. In 1898, he sat across from Hamlin Garland and told the truth. Not the truth of the paintings, not the truth of the newspapers, not the truth of the centennial celebrations. The truth of a man who had been there, who had seen it with his own eyes, who had ridden north when the word came, who had fought on foot at close range, who had walked among the dead with a tally stick counting bodies in the June heat. He did not need a painting. He did not need a legend. He had 7 words. We had no dance that night. We were sorrowful. In the 1980s, a grass fire swept across the Little Bighorn battlefield and cleared decades of overgrowth. Archaeologists moved in with metal detectors. What they found in the exposed soil confirmed what Two Moon had described for over 100 years. Scattered cartridge casings mapped the positions of individual soldiers, showing men firing from isolated, fragmented positions, not a tight, organized defensive ring. The patterns of spent brass told a story of units breaking apart, of men fighting alone, of a command that disintegrated under pressure, exactly as Tu Moon had said. The battlefield told the story the paintings had tried to erase. Now here is the final truth. Victory and sorrow are not opposites. They are the same thing, seen from the side that survived. The men who rode into that valley did not know they were riding into the last morning of their lives. The warriors who stopped them did not know they were winning the last victory of a world that was already ending. Both sides fought for something they could not hold. Both sides lost something they could not replace. The difference is that one side got to build the monument, and the other side got to remember what it actually cost. Tu Moon remembered. He carried it for 41 years after the battle, through reservation life and automobile roads and airplanes in the sky, until the world he had fought for was so far gone, it might as well have been a dream. And when someone finally asked him what it was like, he told the truth. No glory, no triumph, no heroic framing, just 7 words that contain everything. We had no dance that night. We were sorrowful.